The dying sun cast long shadows across the dusty plains of Sweetwater Creek, Texas, as 10-year-old Emmett huddled against the weathered wall of the general store, his small frame shivering despite the lingering heat of the September evening in 1875. His stomach growled, a hollow reminder of 3 days without a proper meal, and his eyes, older than his years, scanned the busy street for anyone who might spare a coin or crust of bread. Thunder Mackenzie adjusted his worn Stetson as he dismounted from his chestnut mare, tying her to the hitching post outside the saloon. At 32, he'd seen enough of life to know its cruelties, yet somehow managed to keep a soft heart beneath his weathered exterior. The trail dust clung to his denim and leather as he stretched his tall frame, ready for a whiskey after 2 weeks driving cattle from San Antonio. "Move along, boy." The shopkeeper's harsh voice cut through the evening bustle as he emerged with a broom, swatting at Emmett. "Your kind ain't welcome here. Go back to that orphanage where you belong." Emmett stumbled backward, his threadbare shoes catching on uneven boards. His eyes welled with tears he refused to let fall. "They don't want me there neither," he whispered, voice barely audible as he turned away. "Nobody cares." Thunder paused mid-stride, his hand resting on the saloon door. Something in the boy's defeated posture struck a chord in him. Without thinking, he changed direction, his spurs jingling softly as he approached. "I care always," he said, his deep voice gentle as he crouched down to meet the boy's startled gaze. "When's the last time you ate, son?" Emmett's eyes widened with suspicion. Adults had never been kind without wanting something in return. "Yesterday," he lied, even as his stomach betrayed him with a loud growl. Thunder's mouth quirked into a half-smile. "Sounds like your belly disagrees." He nodded toward the hotel across the street. "Mabel's serving her famous beef stew tonight. What say we get some food in you before we figure out what's next?" The suspicion in Emmett's eyes didn't waver. "Why would you help me?" Thunder considered the question, memories of his own childhood flashing through his mind. The orphanage in Missouri, the years of hunger and loneliness before old Joe Mackenzie had taken him in, taught him to ride and rope. "Because someone once helped me," he said simply. And that's how the world should work. Across town at the Sweetwater Orphanage and Home for Children, Margaret O'Sullivan slammed her valise shut, her hands trembling with fury. At 26, she'd spent 3 years trying to bring compassion to this place, only to be dismissed by the board of directors for being too coddling with the children. "Miss O'Sullivan," called a timid voice from the doorway of her small room. 8-year-old Lucy stood there, clutching a worn rag doll. "Is it true you're leaving us?" Margaret knelt, gathering the child into her arms. "I'm afraid so, sweet girl, but I'm not going far. I'll be staying in town until I figure out what comes next. But who'll tell us stories? Who'll make sure the little ones get enough to eat?" Lucy's voice broke. "Who'll look for Emmett?" Margaret's heart clenched. 3 days since the boy had run away and still no sign of him. The board had barely bothered to search, claiming they had limited resources for chasing after ungrateful troublemakers. "I promise I won't stop looking for him," Margaret whispered, pressing a kiss to Lucy's forehead. "And I'll visit whenever they let me." But as she walked down the dusty road toward town, her carpet bag in one hand and 3 years of savings in her pocket, Margaret knew visits wouldn't be enough. Something had to change in Sweetwater Creek, and perhaps losing her position was the push she needed to make that change happen. Emmett devoured his 3rd bowl of stew while Thunder sipped coffee, watching the boy with thoughtful eyes. The hotel dining room was quiet, most patrons having finished their meals hours ago. "Slow down before you make yourself sick," Thunder advised, sliding a piece of cornbread toward the boy. "There's plenty more if you need it." Emmett paused, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "Why'd you run from the orphanage?" Thunder asked casually. The boy's shoulders tensed. "Didn't run, got thrown out." "For what?" Emmett stared into his bowl. "Fighting." "Billy Swenson said my ma was a whore who didn't want me. I bloodied his nose." His small fists clenched on the table. Then Mr. Hargrove took his strap to me and said I was more trouble than I was worth. Said I could come back when I learned my lesson. His voice dropped to a whisper. But I ain't sorry, and I ain't going back. Thunder nodded slowly. Fair enough. What about your folks? Any family around these parts? Emmett shook his head. Pa died in the war before I was born. Ma died of fever when I was 5. Been at the orphanage since. Thunder considered the boy across from him. He'd planned to stay in Sweetwater just long enough to collect his pay from the cattle drive and maybe enjoy a day or two of rest before heading north. But something about this kid's defiant courage touched something deep inside him. Well, I reckon you need a place to stay tonight that isn't a doorway, Thunder said, reaching for his wallet. I've got a room upstairs with 2 beds. You're welcome to one of them while we figure things out. Emmett's eyes narrowed. What do I got to do for it? The question, with its implication of expected payment, made Thunder's jaw tighten. Nothing but get some sleep, wash up, and maybe tell me more about this orphanage tomorrow. Before Emmett could respond, the dining room door burst open, and a woman with auburn hair tumbling from a hastily arranged bun rushed in, her green eyes scanning the nearly empty room until they landed on Emmett. Thank God, she breathed, hurrying toward their table. I've been looking everywhere for you. Emmett's expression transformed, fear giving way to something like hope. Miss O'Sullivan, they said you were leaving. Margaret reached their table, kneeling beside Emmett's chair to examine him with worried eyes. Are you hurt? Have you been eating? Her gaze flickered to Thunder, suddenly wary. Who is this man? Thunder stood, removing his hat. Thunder Davidson, madam. I found the boy hungry outside the general store, thought he could use a meal. Margaret's eyes softened slightly. Margaret O'Sullivan, I taught at the orphanage. She turned back to Emmett. Lucy told me what happened with Mr. Hargrove. I've been searching for you since I found out. You got fired? Emmett asked, his voice small. Margaret's smile was sad but determined. Let's just say Mr. Hargrove and I had different ideas about how children should be treated. She glanced at Thunder again. Thank you for looking after him. I can take him now. Thunder raised an eyebrow. And where exactly will you be taking him, Miss O'Sullivan? Back to the orphanage. Of course not, she said sharply. I've taken a room at the boarding house. Emmett can stay with me until. She faltered. Until what? Thunder pressed. Margaret straightened her spine. Until I figure out a more permanent solution. Thunder's experienced eyes took in her worn dress, the mended seams of her shawl. And how long can you afford to keep him at the boarding house on a dismissed teacher's savings? Color flooded Margaret's cheeks. That's hardly your concern, Mr. Davidson. It is if you're planning to take this boy somewhere only to end up in difficulties yourself. Emmett looked between them, confusion and worry etching his young face. Miss O'Sullivan got fired because of me? No, Margaret said firmly, taking his hand. I got fired because I believe children deserve kindness and respect, not straps and hunger as punishment. Thunder studied them both, making a decision that would alter the course of 3 lives. I have a proposal, he said quietly. I've got a small ranch about 2 days' ride from here. Nothing fancy, but there's a sturdy house, good water, and enough work to keep food on the table. The boy could come with me, have a roof over his head and regular meals. Margaret's fingers tightened around Emmett's. You're suggesting I hand him over to a complete stranger? A man I met 5 minutes ago. No, madam, Thunder said, meeting her eyes steadily. I'm suggesting you both come. The place needs a woman's touch, and from what I can see, Emmett here trusts you. You need work, he needs a home, and I could use the help. The boldness of his proposal left Margaret speechless. Emmett looked up at her, a flicker of hope in his eyes that nearly broke her heart. You'd really take us both? Emmett asked Thunder, his voice betraying his disbelief that anyone would want him, let alone him and his teacher. Thunder nodded. I would, but it's up to Miss O'Sullivan. Margaret's mind raced. The propriety of it seemed questionable, an unmarried woman living under the same roof as a bachelor rancher. Yet what were her alternatives? Her meager savings wouldn't last a month, and no respectable school would hire a teacher dismissed for insubordination. I need time to think, she said finally. And references, Mr. Davidson. I'd need to know more about you before considering such an arrangement. Thunder reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a folded letter. The bank manager, Edwin Porter, has known me for years. He handles my accounts, and Sheriff Taylor can vouch for my character. I'll be here until noon tomorrow, collecting my pay from the cattle drive. After that, I'm heading home. He paused. With or without you too? Morning found Margaret pacing the small porch of the boarding house, her mind made up but her courage wavering. She'd spoken with both the bank manager and the sheriff, confirming that Thunder Davidson was indeed a respectable rancher with a small but profitable spread north of Sweetwater. He'd been in the area for 6 years, paid his debts promptly, and had never caused trouble in town. "You're really considering this?" asked Harriet Miller, the boarding house owner, as she joined Margaret on the porch. Margaret nodded. "I don't see another option, Harriet. I can't leave Emmett, and I can't support us both for long." "But to go off with a man you barely know, a man with references from the most respected people in town," Margaret countered. "And it's not as though I'm without resources. If things don't work out, we can always return." Harriet shook her head. "Just be careful, Margaret. The world isn't kind to women without protection." An hour later, Margaret stood outside the hotel with Emmett and her single carpet bag, watching as Thunder secured their belongings to his packhorse. He'd purchased supplies for the journey, including new clothes for Emmett and sturdy boots that actually fit the boy's feet. "The first day's ride will be the hardest," Thunder explained as he helped Margaret onto a gentle mare he'd bought that morning. "But we'll take it slow. There's a good camping spot by Willow Creek where we can spend the night." Emmett, already perched on a small pinto pony that Thunder had also purchased, couldn't contain his excitement. "I ain't never had my own horse before." "Haven't ever had," Margaret corrected automatically, then smiled at his enthusiasm. Thunder swung up onto his chestnut mare. "Stay close, follow my lead, and tell me if you need to rest. It's about 20 miles today, another 15 tomorrow." As they rode out of Sweetwater, Margaret felt a strange mixture of terror and exhilaration. Behind them lay safety and convention. Ahead lay uncertainty but also possibility. She watched Thunder riding ahead, his broad shoulders straight, occasionally glancing back to check on them. A man who stopped to help a hungry orphan, who offered shelter to a dismissed schoolteacher. Perhaps this leap of faith wasn't so foolish after all. The journey proved harder than Margaret had anticipated. By midday, her thighs ached from the unaccustomed posture, and her back protested each step of the horse. Yet she refused to complain, determined not to appear weak or regretful of her decision. Thunder called a halt beside a small stream around noon. "Rest the horses and stretch your legs," he advised, helping Margaret dismount with strong, careful hands. "There's bread and cheese in the saddlebag for lunch." While Emmett explored the stream bank, Thunder handed Margaret a canteen. "You're doing well for someone who hasn't ridden much." "Is it that obvious?" she asked ruefully, massaging her lower back, his mouth quirked into a half-smile that transformed his weathered face. "Only to someone who's watched as many greenhorns as I have. It gets easier." "I hope so," she murmured, then gathered her courage. "Mr. Davidson, Thunder," he corrected. "Thunder," she amended. "I need to understand what you expect from this arrangement from me." His expression grew serious. "I expect you to look after Emmett, keep the house, maybe plant a kitchen garden if you've a mind to. In exchange, you both have a home, food, and safety." He paused. "If you're asking about other expectations, there are none. You'll have your own room with a lock on the door. I'm offering shelter, Miss O'Sullivan, not seeking a wife." The bluntness of his words brought heat to Margaret's cheeks, but also relief. "I appreciate your candor, and please call me Margaret." That night, camped beside Willow Creek, Margaret lay awake long after Emmett had fallen asleep. Across the low fire, Thunder sat with his back against a tree, his hat tipped low but his eyes alert as he kept watch. "Why did you stop for him?" she asked quietly, not sure if he was awake. Thunder's gaze shifted to her. "For Emmett?" "Yes, most men would have walked right past." He was silent for so long that Margaret thought he might not answer. Finally, he spoke, his voice low enough not to wake the boy. I was him once. Orphaned young, shuttled between homes and an orphanage that cared more about breaking spirits than nurturing them. He stared into the fire. When I was 12, a rancher named Joseph Mackenzie caught me trying to steal food from his kitchen. Instead of thrashing me or calling the law, he fed me, gave me work, eventually taught me everything he knew about ranching. He looked up, meeting her eyes across the flames. Joe died 4 years ago, left me his place and everything in it, said the only payment he wanted was for me to pass on the kindness when I found someone who needed it. Margaret studied him in the firelight, seeing beyond the rugged exterior to the compassion beneath. "You're a good man," thundered Davidson. His smile was almost shy. "Don't go spreading that around, bad for my reputation." By late afternoon the next day they crested a hill and Thunder reined in his horse. "There it is," he said, pointing to the valley below. Margaret caught her breath. A small but well-built cabin nestled against the backdrop of rolling hills, a barn and corral to one side, a creek winding through pastureland where cattle grazed. Wildflowers dotted the grass, and cottonwood trees provided shade near the house. "It's beautiful," she said honestly. Thunder's expression held pride and something else, perhaps relief at her approval. "It's not much compared to some spreads, but it's good land. The house is solid, even if it needs a woman's touch inside." "Is it really ours now?" Emmett asked, his eyes wide with wonder. Thunder glanced at the boy, something softening in his face. "It's home for as long as you want it to be." The interior of the cabin was clean but Spartan, a main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen area with a cast iron stove, a small bedroom that Thunder indicated would be Margaret's, and a loft space where Emmett could sleep. Simple furnishings built for function rather than beauty filled the spaces. A table with 4 chairs, a bookshelf with a surprisingly varied collection, a comfortable-looking armchair by the fire. "I'll sleep in the lean-to out back," Thunder explained. "Give you both your privacy." "That's not necessary," Margaret protested. "We can't push you out of your own home." Thunder shook his head. "It's temporary. Been meaning to add another bedroom anyway. With Emmett's help, we can have it built before winter sets in." The following weeks established a rhythm to their new life. Thunder rose before dawn, tending to the animals and ranch work, teaching Emmett the basics of riding, roping, and caring for livestock. Margaret took charge of the household, discovering that while Thunder kept things neat, the cabin had lacked real comfort. She set about making it a home, curtains fashioned from fabric purchased on their first trip to the nearest town, wildflowers in mason jars on the table, bread baking in the oven. In the evenings, Margaret continued Emmett's education, using Thunder's books and her own knowledge to ensure the boy wouldn't grow up lacking learning. To her surprise, Thunder often joined these lessons, his quiet intelligence revealing itself as he discussed history or helped Emmett with sums. One evening in late October, as the first chill of autumn settled over the land, Margaret found Thunder on the porch, staring at the sunset. Emmett was already asleep, worn out from a day of helping repair fence lines. "He's thriving here," she said, wrapping her shawl tighter against the breeze. Thunder nodded. "Boy's a natural with horses and quick with his lessons too. Thanks to you, the way you've taken to him. It's more than I hoped for." He glanced at her, his eyes reflecting the dying sun. "He's easy to care for, hungry for guidance, for someone to show him the way of things." Margaret leaned against the porch railing. "And what about me? Am I easy to care for as well?" The question hung between them, more revealing than she'd intended. In the weeks since coming to the ranch, something had shifted between them, lingering glances, accidental touches that sent warmth through her body, conversations that stretched late into the night. Thunder turned to face her fully. "You know you're not." Her heart sank until he continued. "You're stubborn as a mule, argue every point, and have turned my simple ranch house into something I hardly recognize." His voice softened. "And every day I wake up grateful that you're here." Margaret's breath caught. "Thunder," he shook his head. "I don't expect anything, Margaret." I know you came here for Emmett's sake, not mine, but I'd be lying if I said I haven't come to care for you both far more than I intended." She stepped closer, courage warming her blood. "And if I said I came for Emmett but stayed for other reasons," his eyes darkened. "I'd ask what those reasons might be. Perhaps the same ones that have you sleeping in that cold lean-to rather than building the bedroom addition you've been talking about for weeks." She smiled slightly. "You're afraid of making this arrangement permanent, of admitting that we've become something like a family." Thunder's laugh was low and surprised. "Stubborn and too perceptive by half." He reached out, his calloused fingers brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I didn't want to presume. Or to make you uncomfortable." "I'm not uncomfortable," she whispered. "I'm happy, happier than I've been in years." The kiss, when it came, was gentle, a question rather than a demand. Margaret answered by stepping into his embrace, her hands finding the solid warmth of his chest as his arms encircled her waist. When they finally broke apart, Thunder rested his forehead against hers. "I should speak to the Reverend next time we're in town," Margaret smiled. "Yes, you should." Winter arrived with a fury that kept them close to home, the three of them creating a cocoon of warmth and comfort within the cabin's walls. Thunder moved back into the main house after they married in a small ceremony attended by neighbors from surrounding ranches. Emmett stood proudly as Thunder's best man, beaming as though the union was his own personal triumph. The bedroom addition was completed just before the first heavy snow, giving them all the space they needed. Margaret transformed the cabin with small touches, a quilt here, a rag rug there, items that made the house truly theirs rather than simply Thunder's. Christmas brought their first real test as a family when Thunder rode out to help a neighboring rancher find strayed cattle, despite Margaret's concerns about the gathering storm. "I'll be back before dark," he promised, kissing her goodbye as Emmett watched from the doorway, worry creasing his young brow. But darkness fell with no sign of Thunder, and the snow began in earnest, blanketing the land in white silence. "He knows these lands better than anyone," Margaret reassured Emmett as they kept the fire blazing and supper warm. "He'll find shelter if he needs to." But as the hours passed and midnight approached, even Margaret's faith began to waver. She sent Emmett to bed but remained by the window, a lantern burning bright to guide Thunder home through the storm. It was nearly 2 in the morning when she heard the faint jingling of spurs on the porch. She flung open the door to find Thunder, covered in snow, his face pale with cold but alive. "You're freezing," she gasped, pulling him inside toward the fire. "Got caught in the whiteout," he explained through chattering teeth as she helped remove his snow-crusted clothing. "Had to hole up in the line shack until it eased enough to see the lantern light. I thought," her voice broke. "I was afraid." He pulled her into his arms, still cold but solid and real. "I promised Emmett I'd always care for him, and I promised you forever, Margaret Davidson. It'll take more than a blizzard to keep me from coming home to you both." Their kiss tasted of relief and homecoming, the fear of loss making their reunion all the sweeter. Spring brought new life to the ranch calves in the pasture, wildflowers dotting the hills, and the news that their family would grow by one come autumn. Thunder's reaction to Margaret's announcement was everything she could have hoped for, stunned joy giving way to tender concern and fierce protectiveness. "Are you happy?" she asked as they lay in bed, his hand resting on the still flat plane of her stomach. "More than I knew was possible," he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "When I stopped for that hungry boy in Sweetwater, I never imagined." He shook his head, words failing him. Margaret covered his hand with hers. "That you'd end up with a wife, a son, and another baby on the way." "A family," he corrected. "Something I stopped hoping for long ago." Emmett's reaction to the news of the baby was a mixture of excitement and uncertainty. "Will you still want me around when the baby comes?" he asked Thunder one evening as they mended tack together in the barn. Thunder set aside his work. "Emmett, look at me." He waited until the boy's eyes met his. "You're my son in every way that matters. This baby doesn't change that. In fact," He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded document. "I spoke with Judge Wilson last time I was in town. If you're agreeable, these papers will make it official. You'd be Emmett Davidson, legally and forever." Emmett stared at the adoption papers, his fingers trembling as he touched them. "You really want me? For keeps?" "For keeps," Thunder confirmed. "You and Margaret and this new little one, you're my family. My home." Tears welled in Emmett's eyes. "Nobody ever wanted me before." Thunder pulled the boy into a tight embrace. "I told you that first day, and I meant it. I care always." In September, as golden light bathed the land and the first leaves began to turn, their daughter entered the world after a long, difficult labor that left Thunder pacing the porch while the midwife attended Margaret. Emmett sat beside him, his presence a steady comfort as they waited through the night. When the first cry pierced the dawn silence, both males rushed to the door, held back only by the midwife's stern command to wait until she called them. Finally permitted entry, Thunder approached the bed where Margaret lay, exhausted but radiant, a small bundle in her arms. "Meet your daughter," she whispered, pulling back the blanket to reveal a tiny face with Thunder's straight nose and a dusting of Margaret's auburn hair. Thunder took the infant with reverent hands, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "She's perfect," Emmett peered at his sister with awe. "She's so small." "She'll grow," Margaret assured him, "and she'll need her big brother to teach her everything." "What's her name?" Emmett asked, gently touching the baby's tiny fingers. Thunder and Margaret exchanged a smile. "Hope," Thunder said. "Hope Davidson." It seemed fitting for a child born of their unlikely union, a testament to the hope that had brought them together, a hungry orphan boy, a dismissed schoolteacher, and a lonely rancher who'd found in each other the family they'd all been missing. As autumn deepened toward winter, their little family settled into new rhythms. Neighbors visited to welcome the baby and bring gifts. Emmett took his role as big brother seriously, proudly showing off hope to anyone who came to call. Thunder found himself working with renewed purpose, expanding the ranch operations with an eye toward the future, a future that now held so much more meaning than simple survival. One crisp November evening, with Hope sleeping peacefully in her cradle and Emmett reading by the fire, Thunder found Margaret on the porch, wrapped in a shawl as she watched the sunset paint the hills in gold and crimson. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said, stepping up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. She leaned back against his chest. "I never imagined I could be this happy. No regrets about leaving Sweetwater." Margaret turned in his arms. "The only thing I regret is that we didn't find each other sooner." Thunder's smile was tender as he brushed a kiss against her forehead. "Maybe we found each other exactly when we were supposed to, when we were both ready to build something that would last." From inside came the soft sounds of Emmett reading aloud to his sister, though Hope was far too young to understand the words. The simple domesticity of it made Margaret's heart swell. "You remember what Emmett said that first night, outside the general store?" Thunder nodded, his eyes growing distant with memory. "Nobody cares. And you said, 'I care always.'" Thunder's arms tightened around her. "I meant it then, I mean it even more now." As the last light faded from the sky, they remained together on the porch, the warmth of their embrace keeping the evening chill at bay. From these unlikely beginnings, a chance encounter, an act of kindness, a leap of faith, they had forged something precious and enduring. A family bound not by blood but by choice, by commitment, by love that had grown from the most barren of soils into something flourishing and beautiful. And as stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Thunder Davidson knew with bone-deep certainty that he had found his true home not in the land or the ranch house, but in the hearts of the woman and children who had transformed his solitary existence into a life rich with purpose and joy. Inside, Emmett's voice continued, weaving stories for his sister, creating the foundation of a bond that would last a lifetime. Hope's occasional coos punctuated the narrative, as though she already understood the gift she had been born into a family where every member was cherished. Where I care always wasn't just a promise made once, but a vow renewed with each passing day.